So I don't know if I'm the only representative of the National Trust to have spoken at a Putney debate event. I might be, I suspect, but I'm very pleased to be here. And actually the National Trust will crop up in what I've got to say about forests and about traditions of commoning and how we look after natural resources. That's really the theme of the evening. But as Judy says, I'm also here wearing a hat as a trustee of a charity called Our Democratic Heritage, which tries to make more of the history and the heritage of democratic movements and events in the past that have led us to the liberties and the freedoms that we enjoy today, given that democratic heritage is not part of the mainstream of what organisations, dare I say it, like the National Trust generally get up to. So that's my background, but I want to talk tonight about the Charter of the Forest, because I hadn't actually realised until you organised the event that it was today, that it was sealed. Now we're talking here 797 years ago, on the 6th of November 1217, when the Charter of the Forest was enacted, had the royal seal applied to it. And this is a document that I think is incredibly important to us. The reason I wrote the piece that Julie referred to around the time of the forest debate a few years ago, when forest was such a huge topic of debate and controversy in early 2011. The reason I was referring back to it was because, in a sense, the Charter of the Forest was the first major piece of environmental legislation. The environment it rarely gets a look in political discourse. It's rarely at the top of the list of what people say are their concerns. But here was a big national debate about forests. It's happening again, as Judy said, around the infrastructure bill and various clauses in that. So forests mean a lot to people. They have done for nearly 800 years. And we have this document called the Charter of the Forest that I want to talk a little bit about. I'm hoping this is going to work. Let me just... There we go. So we have to start here, though. The roots of this document. This document was a spin-off from another document sealed 2 years earlier, which is, of course, Magna Carta. And Magna Carta is next year 800 years old. It's a document that stands really at the heart of the constitutional history of this country, of many other countries, because it's a bundle of ideas that were exported across the globe, that were shared by other constitutions, other countries, very much alluding to the principles enshrined in Magna Carta. But what was Magna Carta? Magna Carta was sealed, agreed on the meadow that is called Runnymede between Staines and Windsor, is I think what the document says, on the 15th of June 1215 by King John. And this picture, like all pictures of Magna Carta, completely fictional, completely imaginary, and has a picture of King John with a pen in his hand, signing Magna Carta, which he never did. Of course, King John probably couldn't write. There's no recorded record of King John signing his name anywhere. So the idea that it was ever signed is completely false. It was sealed, though, so the king applied his seal to a parchment. That's what Magna Carta was. Magna Carta was actually a complete flop, a complete disaster. Within a few months, it was annulled by the Pope. The king had torn it up, figuratively speaking. He'd completely reneged on everything he said he would do in the clauses of Magna Carta. But what it was a peace settlement, a negotiation between the king and the barons. His barons, who were at odds with the king because of his fighting adventures in France, his high taxation, the way in which he was running the country. So what Magna Carta was certainly not a statement of values and sort of human rights as we might understand it today. But what it has become over 800 years is a touch point, a lodestone, a document that enshrines a set of principles, and the principle being that the king himself is bounded by constraints, that the voice of the people, the wider body of society, is as important as the king, and that the constitution therefore is in a balance. That's really what the essence of Magna Carta was all about. It was about the king agreeing to give up his claims on taxes, on the freedom of people. So the one big clause of Magna Carta that survives today is the principle of habeas corpus, the idea you can't just lock people up for no good reason. That's one of just 3 chapters in Magna Carta that survives on the statute book in our constitution today. The other being the freedom of the City of London and the freedom of the Church of England. Everything else has gone by the wayside since 1215. But that principle, the principle of habeas corpus, the principle that the king agrees to behave by a certain set of rules and codified in a document, that's the fundamental principle of Magna Carta. Now, I say it was a spin-off. It was a spin-off of Magna Carta. What happened was that King John tore up the document a few months after he had agreed it on the meadows of Runnymede, now owned by the National Trust, but I'll come to that a bit later. He went to war with the barons. They fought a long and bloody internal battle within this country. He died, King John, the next year. He died, I think, in Newark. He was beset by dysentery, possibly brought on by excessive eating of fruit, and he was certainly unwell. He died in 1216. His ship had grounded in the Wash somewhere near King's Lynn, so he'd lost all his treasure by that point. He was in a pretty sorry state. His son assumes the throne, Henry III, and what monarchs did thereafter, every time they came to the throne, every time there was a coronation of a new monarch, they would reissue Magna Carta as a sort of peace offering, as a gesture, as a way of bringing the nation together again. And this was a common practice in medieval England. They would reissue Magna Carta. When I say reissue it, it's a document that survives in numerous different versions. There was the version in 1216, the version in 1217, and so it goes on. It would be copied and sent around the nation. The copies that survive today are often found in cathedrals, because that's where the documents of the state were kept. That's where the scribes were kept. And these documents would be read out at sort of civic occasions. So Magna Carta exists in multiple forms. I think there are 4 copies of the original 1215, which are coming together next year as part of the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. But what happened in 1216 was Henry III, I think he was in a minority at that. He was young at that point, but he reissued Magna Carta to the nation as a gesture of a peace offering to bring the nation together again. He did the same again the following year, but that year the document was separated out. There was a separate document called the Charter of the Forest that was issued at the same time. The reason being that Magna Carta itself had several clauses in it relating to forests, relating to the landscape of medieval England, relating to the way in which forest lands were being managed, being looked after, particularly relating to the fact that King John and King Richard before him and Henry II before him and going back in time, successive monarchs had extended the arbitrary rule of forest law across swathes of the country. But I live in Essex. I think all of Essex was a forest by this time, because the king had extended forest law to cover the whole of the county of Essex. And this was the issue. People were not happy about this. Particularly the barons weren't happy about this. This forest law meant that you were deemed to have to abide by the very stringent draconian rules that the king imposed. He wanted this land for his own deer and for his own resources. He imposed forest law on huge areas of the country. And the reason why Magna Carta features clauses about forests was because the king was agreeing to disafforest those areas, to reduce the size of the area of forest land in England. And in 1217, such was the level of anxiety about forest law and its application that a separate Charter of the Forest was issued alongside the Great Charter of Liberties. In fact, it's from this point that Magna Carta gets its name. Before then, it was simply the Carta, I guess. It was the Charter of Liberties. But after this point, it becomes known as Magna Carta, the Great Charter. I can say what it means even if the Prime Minister can't on American television. That's what it means, of course, the Great Charter. And it's called the Great Charter because it's bigger than the Charter of the Forest. It separates them out and makes them distinct documents. The Charter of the Forest was there's my emails there, you can read. The Charter of the Forest was a document that was designed to be, go into much more detail, sorry, I'll get rid of that, about this, the king drawing back from forest land. So what did it say? Well, there's a picture of it behind there, but there are various clauses. You can read them for yourself on the internet. They're worth reading because this was the king giving up power and control over forest areas.